Progressive Action Network is a statewide member-driven network of local grassroots organizations, groups, unions, and progressive movement leaders working toward a people-led, uncorrupted democracy that works for all, not just the wealthy few. Founded in 2016, NYPAN's original member chapters had coalesced around the message and platform of Bernie Sanders, and we are proud affiliates of our revolution. Like Bernie, we believe in fighting for a more just and inclusive society, workers' rights, and an end to endless war, dealing with the climate crisis, guaranteed universal health care, and an economy that works for the people. NYPAN is a leading political and electoral organization for the left in New York. We welcome all who want to join us in building a movement to transform our government and economy to prioritize the needs of our families and communities instead of corporations and the wealthy. If you want to find out more about NYPAN, I'm going to drop a link in the chat. You can check us out later after the forum. And also, before we begin, I want to give a quick reminder that next week we are hosting a screening of The Big Payback. It's a documentary about a rookie alderwoman from Evanston, Illinois, who led the passage of the first tax-funded reparations for Black Americans. That's going to be next Monday, March 27th at 7 p.m. Eastern, and we'll have a panel discussion after that. I am going to drop the link for that sign up if you wish to.
It's already there.
It's already there. All right, great. Things ahead of me. And again, we do this because NYPAN is dedicated to educating the public about the issues that affect us most and taking action around those issues. If you wish to become a member or help us in our efforts, please consider making a donation to our work. I'm going to drop a link to the chat for that as well. All right. So we're going to begin. I'm going to give you a quick introduction and bio for our presenters this evening. I have Jillian Marcellus. They are Director of Narrative at ASO Communications, where they craft and test messages to realize the future we deserve. Prior to joining ASO Communications, they served as Director of Communications at Transgender Law Center, TLC, the largest national trans-led organization doing what it takes to keep transgender people alive, thriving, and fighting for liberation. Now based in Oakland, California, Jillian grew up in Port Washington, not too far from where I am in Hicksville. And then we have Anthony Vidal Torres. He is the Director of Collaboration at ASO Communications, a firm that develops effective messaging for progressive movement and campaign victories. ASO is a key steward of the race-class narrative and is especially focused on building and activating public support for true democracy in the face of the threat posed by an authoritarian faction. He grew up in Babylon, again, another neighbor, and founded the Reimagine Babylon campaign in recent years that elected progressives for local office in 3 consecutive elections. He's also part of a national team preparing to launch a new movement to mobilize young people across race and place to get freedom for all by making reparations a public and political priority. So without further ado, I am going to hand it off to Anthony and Jillian, and I thank you all for joining us this evening, and here we go.
All right. Thanks so much, Joe, and great to see some friendly faces and some new folks here. Jillian is going to kick us off.
I am. And just a quick heads up, I am going to have to jump a little bit early before questions to pick my kid up. I'm based on the West Coast, but Anthony will be following up after the presentation and carrying it forward once I have to jump. All right. So we are here today to talk through the principles of make-believe is what we call them, race, class, narrative, and messaging that moves and mobilizes. Who here has seen this piece of advice before? Meet people where they are. Yeah, it's everywhere, right? Here's the problem with it. The place where people are on our issues sucks. The very reason we are activists is because we recognize that where people are is not where we need them to be. right? So in our approach to messaging research, to finding messaging, next slide, we look not to take the temperature, not to poll to find out where people are primarily, but rather to change the temperature, to serve not as a thermometer, but rather as a thermostat, to see where people are capable of going, and how best to get them there. So in all, the job of a good message to us is not to say what is popular. Because if you're just saying what is popular, what are you saying really? You're saying puppies are cute. Does that result in the movement that we need people to take? No. So it's not the job of a good message in our point of view to say what is popular, but rather to make popular what we need said. So we're going to go through a few different core principles in that we apply in messaging to ensure that folks are actually moving where we need them to be. So to start, we open with the question of who does what to whom, and this is critical. So in our messaging, we need to make clear who are the actors, and the reason for that is, and you might recognize this image for folks from the Super Bowl way back, of the wardrobe malfunction, the infamous wardrobe malfunction. There's a researcher who did a study showing the video of Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson on stage, and one group saw the video and a description of the incident that used agentive language, like Justin Timberlake unfastened the snap and tore part of the outfit, and then another group saw the video and read a description with inagentive language, so a snap unfastened and part of the outfit tore. The folks who saw the video and read the passage where it was accurately describing Justin Timberlake tore the outfit, were more likely to assign blame to Timberlake and judge him financially liable, despite everyone in every condition viewing the exact same video and then being asked what should happen in response. The language used to describe what happened, whether it was just saying, oh, the outfit tore versus, oh, Justin Timberlake tore the outfit, completely changed what they thought should happen next. So with that in mind, we have a real, we often find in our advocacy language that we use incredibly passive language, which impacts the ways that people see, impacts what people see as possible for our solutions. So we do not provide, when we use passive language like this, like the wealth gap is growing, homes were lost. My boss always likes to joke that, as she's lost her keys, she's lost her glasses, she's lost everything, but she's never once lost her home, in terms of losing sense of where it is, where did it go, right? It's like, it's not lost, it is taken away from people. So passive rather than active voice weakens mobilization. It shrouds who is actually culpable by putting up, by obscuring who the villain is. We are making it seem like this is all just happening naturally, and therefore since it is happening naturally, it is not human caused, then it can't be human solved. So it is critical in our messaging to identify someone who is responsible, who is making decisions that are creating the current situation, or who are blocking solutions, even if it's too difficult to assign that, like who created it, it's years and years long, at least who is blocking the solutions today that we need. And that is a critical piece of getting of moving away from this idea that all of these problems just exist and float out there, versus these are problems that human beings have made and human beings can solve. Another challenge that we see in our messaging frequently on the left is hedging. Call this a hope at a chance at an opportunity. You'll see this a lot in mission statements. This one is pulled from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where it's dedicated to the idea that all people deserve the chance to live a healthy and productive life right? So you're seeing there's just so much distance between it's just like we're not actually promising to do anything, right? We have an idea of a thought of a thing that could maybe happen someday, right? It's a hope at a chance at an opportunity. And so telltale hedge words are hope to, strive to, aspire to, seek to, endeavor to, we work to. And as much as possible in describing your own work, you want to cut that out so that you are just more directly saying what you are going to deliver. And some further examples of this, like strives to create a culture of, campaign seeks to challenge, when really you can just say our campaign challenges the embedded interests that are preventing us from being able to thrive, right? You don't need to say seeks to challenge this culture, right? We also have seen, we've done testing around this. We do a lot of messaging research, a lot of testing, a lot of polls and focus groups and so forth to actually ensure that what we're doing is effective. And one thing that we have found in testing language is that by cutting out hedge phrases like access to, we significantly increase the intensity of support among our base and support among our persuadables. So instead of making sure that every child has access to high quality public education, making sure that every child has a high quality public education is a much, much more compelling way to talk about the vision that we hold. Next piece, often that advocates kind of might slip into is negation of being the faction of no and don't and stop and we are not, right? And so when we describe the problem, we often rely on negation, like what you'll see in the next slide, where we have what our opposition says about us. We allow that to actually define us, because when we are saying what we are not, we are repeating what our opposition wants other people to think, right? My parents are not child abusers. What do you walk away from that with, right? Or what I did for, or the CRT is not taught in our K-12 schools, right? What we're actually inadvertently reinforcing the opposition narrative. We can't myth bust our way into a new public understanding of, what it means to be trans, for example. When we repeat a myth, we further entrench it, and people recall the assertion and forget the claim of falsehood. So nouns imprint more than words like don't or not. And it has a backfire effect that we've seen in research where people become more convinced and it because they remember they remember child abuse and trans, but they don't remember whether there was a not there or not. Next slide. So more examples of if you look at this, what do you walk away with? Biden win policies and killing whales, right? That's the thing. And then the Sierra Club response of unfounded and premature, correlating wind turbine construction with whale mortalities. It's really just further entrenching this linkage that the opposition is trying to create. Next slide, more examples. There's the famous, of course, I am not a crook. We all know how that went for him. We are not being inundated with new migrants. Muslims are not a threat to our way of life. All of these are ultimately in our understandable, justifiable instinct to refute the terrible things our opposition says. We are reinforcing it. So we're going to do a couple of quick exercises in the chat to illustrate this. So next slide. So yes or no, would you use this toilet? Throw it in the chat. Yeah, right? It is not that reassuring to have somebody refute a claim. Because what does it make us do? It makes us make the association that wasn't there already. All right, next one up. Do you think that this chair is haunted? Does that sign reassure you? Oh, okay, good. Phew. Right? Right. That sign, it makes you think for the first time, oh crap, I do not want to sit in that chair. Right? And then next one, yes, this one, a favorite one. Australian Prime Minister says he didn't shit his pants at a McDonald's. What do you think? You know, is that really effective? Is that negation? You know, really getting it. And then one quick exercise then next, which is this is a common one that we come across is trans people are not a burden. Where we are reinforcing a link between trans and burden, right? How would you all rewrite this to not be to not be a negation, to double negate myself? How would you rewrite this to combat the myth, the terrible thing trans people add to society? Trans people are a benefit. Precisely. Yeah. Another example, you know, trans people are people, vibrant. Exactly, right? So we are still in these examples that you just raised, we are still rebutting the terrible things the opposition says about us, but we are doing so in a way that does not reinforce what they're saying. Trans people are valuable. Exactly. Another example that we've often seen is like the switch from no one is disposable to everyone counts. All right, so next, yes, this is a quote from Anthony and my boss. When you negate a frame, you evoke it. When what you fight, you feed. You need to say what you are for. And so the issues with negation move beyond just repeating the opposition frame and adding a no or a don't in front of it, but towards a problem of people on the left frequently making negative demands. So next slide. And this is sort of a subtler form of negation where what we are pushing for, what we are proposing, what we are calling for is an end to mass incarceration, for no cops in school, for no more drug war, to stop fracking, right? Like we have, it's don't stop and take this away, right? And catastrophe, first of all, like with catastrophe messaging like this, where we're emphasizing all the things that are bad, we make people shut down. We make people not want to get involved. And people have to believe that there's a fix, that something, there's a fix that is more than just the absence of a bad thing, that there actually can be the presence of a good thing. People have 99 problems, they don't want yours. And so how it can seem very, very challenging in a lot of our work to turn something where we are fighting against a truly terrible thing into actually an affirmative, positive demand and vision, but it is possible. So here are some examples of, you know, truly challenging ways, like, for example, trying to stop interference with our elections and with the vote, right? Where we were able to turn that around, or we had folks, worked with folks to turn around to have an affirmative message of voters decide, count every vote. Next slide is this is a ad where we, I think in one of the most challenging moments for making an affirmative demand, turned it around. And even in the case of just simply asking, of simply demanding police need to stop killing Black people, right? We actually, you can turn that into a really compelling way of saying what you're for. So. Another important piece around that ad and other ads that we do is to move away from what we call harms and horrors messaging, which is messaging that drives pity or sympathy for a group of people by detailing just how awful things are for this poor group of victims over there, which is well-intentioned, but ultimately the sympathy messaging is another form of othering, right? Another form of saying, look at this group of people who are not like us. And so we need to move away from messaging that relies on sympathy, on having people feel sorry for those people, while not seeing this as an issue that impacts their own lives, to messaging that actually drives empathy and allows audiences to see themselves in our narrative, and relate to the lives of the folks and relate to the issue that we are talking about through shared experiences. In an example in one example that was really showed this is our messaging on trans youth. We tested the impact of a pity message, protect trans youth who face devastating, crushing discrimination and bullying that impacts their mental health, that devastates their mental health. So we presented half of our sample with that message. We presented half of our sample with the message that was talking about affirming everyone to be their authentic selves, no matter their age or gender. And then we asked everybody, people who had heard the sympathy message and people who had heard the authentic selves message. We asked everyone, should we trust transgender young people to know what is best for their own health and well-being? And guess what? People in our base who heard that protect trans kids message were less likely to believe that we should trust transgender young people to know what's best for themselves. So this is an example of how even our messaging can inadvertently work against what we're trying to accomplish, because we want to get people to a place where we are supporting the leadership of the communities we're discussing, right? Another example is from Australia here, of how to shift from negation and negative demands to saying what we are for. This is a campaign around asylum that our boss, Anachin Garsorio, worked on in Australia. Started with seeking asylum is not illegal, learn the facts. And because, of course, the issue all along was that the government did not know the facts, like, right? And so clearly not what is going on, right? That to a harms and horrors message showing a kid in a cage, to an affirmative message showing somebody who was seeking asylum, talking about dreams and visions in a way that folks can connect to, and making the affirmative demand bring them here. Next, here's an example of an ad that does that as well on this issue.
Most of us will do whatever it takes to make a better life. We work, sacrifice, and even pack up everything to put food on the table, provide for our families, or send our kids to a decent school. Immigrant Americans move here for the promise of freedom and opportunity. America is supposed to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. Let's vote to make it that way.
And ultimately, what we are trying to do with an ad like that, in addition to how we, through empathy, we are trying to create an overlap of brand identity between the issue that we are working on, our campaign, and who people are. So we're trying to find that place where there is an overlap of identity that we can tap into. And that is like one thing that ad does effectively. And then we have one more ad that we want to show that also gets at this and also takes an issue that a lot of folks talk about in a very individualized way and shows how we can actually talk about it in terms of relationship and speak more from a place that more folks can identify.
Someone you love may struggle with a pregnancy they longed for that couldn't survive, that would endanger providing for the children they already have, that comes too soon after giving birth, that they were too sick to carry, that wasn't right for them. Someone you love might need an abortion someday. You can help ensure that when the day comes, they can get the care they need.
Support you.
All right, with that, I am going to pass it off to Anthony to keep it going.
Thank you, Jillian. And again, we're going to have another exercise and some time for questions towards the end. So I'm going to do a whirlwind tour. The next principle: if your words don't spread, they don't work. You can have the best written message in the world, but guess what? If no one hears it, it by definition is unpersuasive. So let's get into how we can get it out there. Who knows what this is? Miracle Whip. Who here uses it? Oh, I see some no's and I see some strong yeses. Okay, here's the question for you all. Who does Kraft, the corporation behind Miracle Whip? Who do they spend the vast majority of their advertising dollars on? Is it trying to get new converts? People who already use it? Multiple audiences? Who are they spending the vast majority of their dollars on in advertisement? In terms of this question, thinking less of demographics, thinking more like, are they trying to get new customers? Are they doing it to the people who raised their hands already on the call who are using it? Who are they directing those ads at? Okay, one more. All right, well, Elise, I love love the competition that's already happening in the chat here. So there are a group of different answers. The answer is they spend 90+% of all their advertising dollars on their super customers, on their major fans. The reason for that is we're going to get into the theory of change of effective messaging. It's because guess what? The people who raised their hands on this call, who was like, yes, Miracle Whip, they are your messengers. They are the people that you need to be at the cookout, at the barbecue, at the family event saying, ooh, I use Miracle Whip on this. It's so great. I use it all the time. Try. Oh, you didn't realize the thing you're eating is Miracle Whip. They are the ones, rather than Kraft, the corporation, who are going to bring in the new converts, bring in people on this call who maybe didn't already use Miracle Whip and know what it was. And why is that? That's because a message is like a baton. And if it's dropped at any point during the race, it is therefore not going to make it to the end and not make it to more audiences. And so we need to activate our choir. And when we talk about a choir, we're talking about, of course, the activists like you and I on this call, but also the larger base of people where we live who all do agree with us, but who are not yet involved in our movement. We need them repeating and repeating a core message over and over again, because our choir is who talks to the persuadables. And our choir in our public audiences on Long Island, they are about 25% of the population, our choir, our base audience. Those are people who agree with us. They're not necessarily involved in your organizations, but they are the people who agree with us. If you ask them about the issues, they would agree with what we're for. The majority of the population and almost all electorates in the US are persuadable. And these are the folks who toggle between conflicting ideas. This group of folks are often misunderstood in politics and in campaigning and organizing. Most people hold contradictory ideas about how the world ought to work. And that means they can be the same people who are like, yes, we should do something about racism against Black and brown people. And also, I think reverse racism against white people is maybe a thing. They listen to whatever is the most common and most repeated thing said to them by people they know, trust, and look up to. And guess what? Those are members of your base and your choir. There are way more people in our base than there are activists. So we need them to be repeating our message to the persuadables, so the persuadables then think that it is truth. It is common sense. So think about moments in the past when our movements have been loud, repeating a common message, and then that is when we are often winning the conversation, because that's when we're getting to these persuadables. But that's what our opposition is doing too. They know this theory of change very well. And what do we do about our opposition? What we actually need to do, and this is hard for many activists to swallow, but the reality is we have to have messaging that actually marginalizes, repels, and neutralizes our opposition. And they are about the 25% of the population who do not ideologically agree with our true opponents. They do not agree with any of our issues. And in fact, we want our messaging to be something that repels them. There's two reasons for that. One, if you're gonna hit a nerve, you gotta hit a nerve. If you say something that everyone agrees with, so if you say something and the opposition member of your audience who was just sharing content from the Proud Boys all of a sudden likes your message, guess what? It means you're either saying milquetoast, you're saying puppies are cute, and they agreed with you. They're like, yeah, puppies are cute, but guess what? They're gonna like turn out against you and they're gonna vote against every measure you have tomorrow. Or you said something fucked up. You said something that reinforces xenophobia, transphobia, anti-Blackness. You reinforced something that activated their worldview. If you're going to hit a nerve, you need to hit a nerve. You're going to advance a political argument, you need to advance our worldview, and it needs to be one that activates our base, wins over the persuadables, and repels our opposition. So as a theory of change, this is what that looks like. We engage and unleash our base with our messaging so that they move the persuadables. And then while we have that supermajority, we also are repelling the opposition. Please all, please none, people. You need to be able to activate a message that is going to do these three things in order to not only change the terms of the debate, but to break through the incessant political noise that we have in our public conversation, and to build the power and support we need to win. And so how do we do that? I'm going to go through a couple other principles in here before our next exercise. You've heard Jillian mention this, say what you are for. By breaking a signal through the noise, in order to do that requires constant repetition. And so that is why our messages must persuade while also energizing our base. We need to say fewer things more often. Again, on Long Island, I think that you all are very familiar, unfortunately, with the fact that our opposition, again, knows this theory of change pretty well. They repeat few things. They get other people to repeat the same thing. I'm going to give examples, though, that show ways that our side has also employed this theory of change successfully as well. But when it comes to contending with our opposition, we also know that politics isn't solitaire. I don't really play this game, but in politics, we can't make our opposition shut up. Instead, we need to counter them and repeat our vision boldly and loudly at every turn. So every part of our campaigns needs to think about what is the messaging and how are we going to overcome our opposition. And that's because we have to make a real key choice here. What conversations does our opposition want us to have? Instead of lingering on that question, we need to linger on what conversations do we want to have? What is the debate that we want the public, whether that be in our communities on Long Island, across New York State, or in the country having, rather than trying to contest the debate on our opposition's terms. And we know those terms are damn awful. Here are just examples. You all are familiar with this. And a key thing here, we actually call, Anat on our team recently dubbed their most recent version of this strategy of divide and conquer, CRT, crime, race, and anti-trans attacks. That is like their common way of remixing an age-old divide and order to conquer strategy, where our opposition uses an arsenal of dog whistles and mixed in with now transphobic siren songs. So this is language that is may seem benign, but is meant to emotionally activate racially and regressive and antagonistic ideas and fueling scapegoating in order for our opponents to grab and hold on to power. And so you see, I want to really remind folks, like people like George Santos seized congressional districts on Long Island running on this. It wasn't really about their resume. So that's what's getting the attention now. He ran running on these same anti-crime attacks we were seeing across New York and across the country. You saw this when it came to state Senate races. You see this when it comes to what the Nassau GOP leader is putting out, or all the way down to city councils. And you see the same message being repeated and remixed across all of these different fronts. So how do we address these attacks that are loaded with these racist and transphobic dog whistles and siren songs? Well, we have to have a conversation that actually is going to not only be the one that we have, but that actually overcomes what our opposition is dishing out. So this is where the race class narrative comes in. Our opposition's narrative, which has again been decades and generations in the making, they've just remixed the same thing they've done back in the segregation era, etc., is they ignite racial and now gender-based fears to create a disgust with government. That's their government. Their government is going to take away from deserving, hardworking people coded white and give it to undeserving, prolific criminal people coded black and brown in order to fuel and tap into economic resentment that our opponents create, and the cycle continues. Instead, we need to have, of course, a conversation on race, gender, and class on our terms. We cannot ignore this because guess what? If we are just silent on race and just want to talk about class, or we don't create a connection to how this is a political and economic strategy of hoarding, then in fact, the only thing our audiences hear on things like race is what our opposition is saying. And so when you make and advance your solution without a compelling story that actually in this case is race forward, then people may agree with your solution, but then point the finger still at the brown person over there instead of the rich person over here. So the race class narrative is a proven way for us to advance our vision for the beautiful future we can by igniting cross-racial solidarity and using that as the basis for pointing to how we achieve a government for all and cut through the deliberate division and strategic racism we need to deliver shared prosperity and racial justice. So this is how we strip the right's relentless baiting strategy and build power. And this was co-created by our manager, Heather McGee, our manager, Anach Osorio, along with Heather McGee and Ian Henry Lopez. Since 2017, this has been an empirically tested narrative. We test it all the time, of course, in research, but also in the field, and we'll see that momentarily, in order to make the case on race, class, and gender to move people on our progressive worldview and neutralize our opposition strategy. So this is to speak to and primarily mobilize our base, who are primarily Black and POC young people, convince that largest group of persuadables I'd mentioned earlier, who are majority white, but definitely a multiracial group, and to repel our opposition. So what does that look like? And this is what the architecture of the race, class, gender narrative looks like. And the ordering matters. And you'll see examples of this throughout. We always open a race, class narrative with shared values and that name, like freedom, and that name or show race, class, and gender explicitly to make it explicit who is the big us. Then we'd name the villains who exploit divisions across races or exploit lack of familiarity with trans people in order to get back into and hold on to power and wealth. We need to name the villains, and we need to name explicitly what they are doing, expose their strategy without repeating what they're actually saying, and name their motivations. We talk about the problem second, not first. Remember what Jillian mentioned earlier. We got to bring people in, then hit what the problem is. Then we emphasize unity, how we achieve victory, and close with our desired outcomes and our vision for tomorrow. And we're going to get into an exercise of that shortly. This is what that looks like. This is a winning narrative from Wisconsin. So that what it sounds like is Wisconsinites, no matter where we come from or what our color, We want to provide for our families. That's values. But today, certain politicians fuel divisions between us, trying to make us fear our immigrant neighbors in order to distract us from their failures, naming the villains. Lastly, we need to go all in for all of us joining together from Milwaukee to Superior to make a better future, just like we won civil rights in our past. We are all in this together, and by uniting as voters, we'll rewrite the rules so Wisconsin is a place where we can all prosper. So this is what it sounds like in a message in this architecture. But what does that look like? Here's an example from Texas, our partners there who worked on a race class narrative for their state.
From Fort Worth to Uvalde to Brownsville.
Texans know our worth.
We're worth the true value of our work.
We are worth making our own bodily choices and having energy our families can depend on.
We are worth more than leaders who abandon us
In times of trouble.
Then blame some other
For our struggles. Together as voters,
we can ensure every Texan
has the freedom
To thrive.
No exceptions.
I'm excited for this part. We're going to get into some winning case studies of how people have used this messaging in action to create incredible change right now. So Minnesota, remember that woman on the left? Remember her? Who can drop in the chat who the woman on the left is? I actually hope that people don't remember, because that would also be a win. The points to whoever can remember who that is. So I'll name her in a second. This was Minnesota before our folks were organizing and what they've been facing in their state when it comes to before they employed the race class narrative in their organizing. Does this sound familiar? Folks who we had the Republicans there fear mongering against about Black people to suburban voters. The woman is named Michelle Bachmann. She ran for president back in the day, and she was a Republican member of Congress from Minnesota. We have the various different iterations of MAGA, and there was massive fear mongering and scapegoating of the large Somali, Black and Muslim immigrant and refugee population in Minnesota. And things were looking real fucking bad in Minnesota in 2017. Again, all of this probably just a remix of what we've all been seeing on Long Island and New York. But guess what? Folks came together and united behind race class narrative campaign that became Greater Than Fear, in which people created, and you'll see, use this message. Every group wore the same t-shirt, every group had the same message, every group pushed out this messaging in all of the different campaigns. We created a surround sound where people knocking doors, people canvassing, people putting up things on social media and at in-person events were pushing out the same effective narrative. When the Republicans tried to scapegoat, once again, Black people in 2020 in order to mobilize a backlash against the Black Lives Matter movement, instead, this coalition came together with their I Am a Suburban Mom campaign. An incredible, great tactic. I'll let you watch, and I'll put in the chat, you can watch on your own, where they use this narrative and effectively combated what the opposition did. And this is definitely something that you could replicate effectively on Long Island. And here's what one of their ads looked like, sending their winning message. And I'll say what happens right after.
In Minnesota, we know long winters. And we know how to dig our neighbors out of the snow. Because whether it's our first Minnesota winter or our 50th, we've all been there. So when certain politicians want to divide us and make us afraid, we know that means they've got nothing else to offer. We're on to them. There are lots of ways to be Minnesotan, and all of them are greater than fear. In Minnesota, we're better off together. Vote Greater Than Fear between now and November 6th.
So, positive story. These folks won big. They won at higher margins than Democrats who were running in these same similar districts across the country. Folks, they were even successful enough where the entire Democratic Party of Minnesota took on the brand in the final weeks of the campaign. They ultimately, this campaigning efforts continued through 2020, through 2022. Minnesota now is a Democratic trifecta state, a very different place than it looked politically in 2017. And what is the mandate they got through the messaging and the campaigning that they did? The narrative mandate they won means they are now a state where we just got off the phone with organizers there. They've won 6 out of 8 of their decade-long movement priorities in the span of 1 month. They got their Freedom to Drive campaign, winning driver's licenses for all Minnesotans regardless of immigration status. They won one of the most progressive and comprehensive climate legislations in the country with their 100% bill. They won freedom to vote legislation, expanding it to tens of thousands of people. They are winning and advancing the conversation on gender affirming care and protecting abortion freedoms. That is what you can get and deliver on the other end of an effective narrative organizing campaign in your state. And we've seen positive examples of this on Long Island as well. And I'm pointing at Loretta on this call, who was a part of the organizing we did with Reimagine Babylon, where we used the race class narrative, as you see on the left, in a contested school board race, where we elected Ari McKenzie and utilized this messaging to activate and move voters. And on the right is just from an article I recently put out, making this case for why we should use this approach in New York and Long Island. And I am going to just copy some of these links in the chat for you all to look at later. Oh, I didn't give everything, but oh, here we go. And to close before we go to an exercise, I just want to come back to one other principle that we're going to work on together. A great message is one that inspires through outcomes rather than process. You'll notice that in a lot of these messaging, we're talking about what is the world that we deliver? How is my life better on the other end? Rather than, here's my detailed policy. Can I tell you more about how many bullets it has and how much money is in there and how much all these different steps of the bureaucratic ladder needs to happen? Don't take your policy outside, it's unseemly. Instead, we need to message by talking about what is the vision we're selling. In other words, I'm going to talk about, oh, actually I have one more thing to share with you. We're going to talk about our brownies. And here's one ad recently that folks are actually using in the Fund Our Future efforts with the state budgets across the country to win more public funding. Keep an eye out.
Our money could go here, or it could go here. Our money could go here, or it could go here. Just imagine where our money could go if corporations paid what they owe instead of taking it for themselves. Tell your state representatives to demand corporations pay what they owe.
Yeah, so at the end, it wasn't like, here's all the different tax and spend policy things. At the end, it was clear demand and also painting the picture of what is it actually, what does it look like to fund our future?
Our money could go here, or...
Here we go. So we're gonna do an exercise, get ready. On the left, you see Duncan Hines. This is the box, right? Which side faces the aisle? Does the recipe face the aisle? It's the front of the box, right? And is that what's actually in the box? What's in the box? When you buy Duncan Hines or Betty Crocker, what's in there? It's, oh, I see someone mouth. It's powder. It's a pile of shit. That's what policies and recipes are. They're just like all this detailed stuff. And Duncan Hines, what they know is they need to sell the brownie. Sell what is the outcome of you coming and making through this powder, making this recipe. So we need to be selling the brownie. The brownie is, what is the quality healthcare that our families have? What are the quality schools that we have? What does our communities look like when we actually pass climate and clean energy policies? What does it look like in our workplaces to be able to breathe easier and be able to get a fair return on our work? That is the brownie that people want. And that is what we know from all the research in the field where we've done about how we actually motivate more people to join our ranks and take action with our movements. Sell the brownie, not the recipe. Look, I know we all like the wonky stuff, but that's what some of us like. No one else likes that. That is unmotivating to most people. Most people want to know, How is this going to impact what's on the dinner table? How is this going to impact me in my real everyday life? So we're going to take 5 minutes. You're not going to hear my voice for a second. And we're going to work on brownies. So think about, what are the brownies in your work? And sometimes what it can be helpful to do is think about maybe a policy you've been talking a lot about and pushing for. What is the brownie? What happens if you win that? What is the ultimate brownie you're trying to sell to your community, your audience, to make people take action? And what are the delicious outcomes you're working toward to providing your communities? So take a few minutes and drop in the chat some brownies, and then we'll workshop some of them together before Jillian has to jump. And thank you, by the way, Elise, for shouting out. Yes, the campaign and the narrative mandate we were able to create through organizing in Babylon with Race Class Narrative got us to, of course, win that school board race, won 2 school board races actually in face of opposition, and won elected Loretta and another of our colleagues in Reimagine Babylon to the library board. That is in the face of all the anti-CRT, anti-trans attacks, all of that happening in an electorate that is fairly purple and 94% white. We led a race forward progressive campaign and won all of that. So thank you for the shout outs. Okay, think of your brownie, take 2 or 3 minutes and then drop them in the chat. All right, take another minute and then we'll jump in and with a couple of these. All right, let's start with the pick one in the chat. Jillian, you pick one first since you have to leave shortly.
Sure. Yeah, communities that welcome all people. That's great. Yeah, so painting the picture of what it actually feels like to be, as opposed to focusing on what you're eliminating. I think it could get even more, you know, it's always hard to pair with getting a little bit more into the actual issue area. But yeah, that's a great start for painting a picture. Clean air, water, and healthy food for all. Likewise, excellent.
I'll jump in with another. Ting, you're on a really great track here. Seeing any doctor or dentist you want when talking about healthcare, and like, instead of talking about the details of the reforms you're trying to make, like, what is the outcome? The outcome is feel free, you're free to, and your family is free and your kids are free to have coverage, whether or not you keep that job or that marriage. It's something that people can tangibly feel and see in their life. Attractive homes that you can afford to rent, buy with nearby parks and thriving communities. That is a brownie and an outcome. I want to challenge Tara. You have paid parental leave. If you want to come off mute, you're welcome to, or anyone else. how can we turn that? That's a recipe. Paid parental leave is a recipe, policy. It's a thing it's a how you get to the brownie. What is the brownie? What is the actual articulation of like, what does this mean in our lives? Give Tara a moment.
Maybe more productive workers, moms and dads that are not just harried all the time because they can't have the time off with their kids.
Okay, that last part, you were on it. Time with kids and family. Elise, you raised your hand.
Oh, I just put it in the chat. Getting to stay home with your sick kid.
Yes, yeah. Brownie is paid time to be there the first time your newborn talks. To paid time to be there for the loved one who needs your care. All of that is like the brownie, the good outcome, the desirable outcome that people want in their lives. And that we actually did research and testing on that specifically. When you say stuff like that, you are more mobilizing for your target base audiences and more persuasive, rather than saying just like, we need paid parental leave. Most people do support if you ask that in a poll but people are more likely to fight for it and more likely to prioritize it if you say it like paid time to be there and to provide the care for your families.
Okay, that makes sense.
Thank you, Tara,
Thank
for
you.
jumping right in. Okay. Any others, Jillian, or we'll keep moving?
I think let's keep moving because I know we got.
Okay. Some of y'all are already pretty good at this.
Yeah.
We do this training a lot with organizers and folks all across the country. It can be really hard to get people to sell the brownie than the recipe. So remember that. And let's keep going. 1 second. Here we go. Okay, we're gonna finish this presentation. Jillian will leave us at some point soon, and then I will take questions at the end. And I want to apply these principles through the lens of the story of the 2022 midterms. So all of the different things we've talked about, I want to give the case study of what also just happened nationally and in the places that we're from. So at the beginning, before, there was a lot of bullshit on our side that we had to deal with before the midterms. There was a lot of pushback about talking about villains at all, and talking about the Trump Republicans who are taking away our freedoms and tried to overthrow the will of the people on January 6th. There were a lot of pundits out there who were like, you Democrats and progressives can't talk about what the Republicans are doing at all. That's gonna make them lose, or whatever bullshit. There was also a lot of hand wringing on abortion focus, like, oh God, if Democrats or progressives say the word abortion, or if they talk about reproductive freedom, that's a losing issue. Nobody cares about that. People are only caring about prices. That's the only thing they're caring about, or they're only caring about crime. Oh, I guess these pundits were like, they're only caring about what the Republicans are talking about. But remember, it's not the job of a good message to say what is popular. It is the job of a good message to make popular what we need said. We need to make our conversation the conversation. That's what we can do through organizing. That's what people can do who own media too, but that's also what we can do through movement work together. And so we had a task at ASO Communications, along with many progressive organizations across the country, to be part of this campaign we call the Protect Our Freedoms Midterms campaign. And the goal of this was called mobilization. This is what our theory of change is. We needed to mobilize our base of voters to turn out and to persuade conflicted voters to vote with us while repelling our opposition. And of course, voters of color making up a key constituency of our base and persuadable audiences. We needed to have messaging that candidates could use to win in their tough races, and lift us up across different contests across the country. And here were different ways we applied those principles. So we had to make the selection a clear contrast between freedom and those fighting to protect our freedoms, and fascism, between everything voters desire and what Trump Republicans and our opposition were intent on destroying and still continue to be. So this is different than saying like, here's all the things Democrats accomplished, or this is different from just saying like, here's only the good things. You'll notice that in our race class narratives, we of course sell the brownie, but we also still talk about the villains in contrast to what our values are and what our vision is for. And so what does that look like how did we do that? How did we create that contrast? Here's an example from one of the ads that we played nationally.
Which side are you on? Americans who believe liberty and justice are for all? Or traitors inciting violence against our country and trying to take away our freedoms? Which side are you on? People who work for a living and care for our families? Or the Trump Republicans who block everything our families need? This November, it's time to show which side you're on. Vote for Democrats. FFPAC is responsible for the content of this ad.
So that was the principle of setting a clear contrast. And this ad we tested extensively and showed it was incredibly mobilizing to our base voters, as well as being very persuasive to those who are conflicted. Next, we needed to maintain the persuasion window of that was opened when the Supreme Court justices struck down Roe and took away reproductive freedom. But we needed to tie reproductive freedom and abortion to other issues. We needed to create an interconnected narrative about freedoms, with Roe and abortion being a proof point. So we were trying to activate loss aversion. Look, they and their allies in the court took away reproductive freedom nationally. Now they're trying to take away our freedom to learn, our freedom to be ourselves, our freedom to provide for our families, connecting it. So we could channel and activate righteous anger and turn that into action. So creating stakes. And this is an example of how we tied together with freedom, reproductive freedom, with other freedoms we needed to protect.
When people get freedom, they will fight to keep it at great cost, at any cost. Because freedom isn't slogans, it's a thing that is lived, that is shared, that is defended. Here in America, we've seen what happens when Trump Republicans have claimed to be for freedom only to take it away and impose their will. Through their courts, by their mobs. This November, remember, you're a part of the fight for freedom.
Way to Win Action Fund is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Third principle, again, I'm saying freedom a lot. We're on the freedom train because freedom is proving to be an incredibly helpful value for us to use and lead with our messaging. So the freedom frame we use to connect issues, both to affirm our demands and to call out our opposition. And we can use freedom in a variety of different ways. And this is because in our country, freedom and liberty are the overwhelming top value for our target audiences. And this is across race and place and party. Nearly every demographic, the top value that is important to Americans is freedom. This is different in different countries, different historical contexts, etc. But freedom is also a contested value. For too long, for the last few decades, the right wing has tried to claim and control and use freedom for their causes. But we have to remember that freedom has been integral as a values-led narrative for progressive victories since for centuries in this country, whether that be from the abolitionist movement, leading with liberty and freedom, whether that be all the way to the 4 freedoms of FDR and the New Deal era, whether that be Freedom Summer and the freedom movement that later we now know as the civil rights movement, the Black freedom struggle, and what more recently, the freedom to marry. There was an intentional messaging change in the movement from gay marriage or same-sex marriage to talking about the freedom to marry, and that being the winning message that ultimately won, and of course love is love as well, but ultimately led to these progressive victories. And so freedom is a term that we can contest and render to advance our progressive worldview as well. Especially, actually, a very small point here is when we use freedom in the plural. Protect our freedoms activates a more collective, and the idea that freedom is for more than just my type of person, and that there's many freedoms that need to be protected or realized. And as I mentioned before, if your words don't spread, they don't work. We launched this campaign in the summer, and then throughout those months and into the fall, we had to get freedoms in the field. And so you can see here how we work with organizations across the country and campaigns to make sure that freedom then became the conversation. This became the conversation then, who is protecting or taking away your freedoms in this election. And we got winning those candidates who were smart and or were felt compelled then to talk about freedom on our side, as you see here, like Governor Whitmer, then utilized this as the core brand of their messaging. In fact, Pennsylvania now governor, Josh Shapiro, his slogan became protecting real freedom. And so this is just how we did this campaign. We worked together across organizations, across coalitions to use this messaging in media and social media, through our organizing at the doors, on social media, with our candidates, with our ads. Everything had to be a surround sound so that nothing fell through. Every time your family member was seeing it on TV, they were also hearing it from their friend. They were also hearing it at the doors. So we shared all this messaging open source, had it available to any and all activists and organizers and organizations across the country. I'll just put in the chat, you'll see the toolkit that we use to, with all of the ads available for people to use in this instance. And by the end of 2022, on the eve of the election, we saw that freedoms became the top issue at stake. People became convinced that this election was a crossroads moment. It was no longer a referendum about Biden and the Democrats. It was about a crossroads between which version of America we were going to be, and how we were going to protect our rights and freedoms. So we had this conversation on our terms. And in this research we've done post-election, we talked to different types of voters, and we found that freedoms is what motivated their choice. They were repeating messaging back to us, whether that was a white man in Pennsylvania talking about our freedoms were very much on the line, or a Latino man in Nevada, if we're the land of the free, why are they taking away our freedoms? To folks in Georgia about our freedoms being chipped away, and a Black woman in Georgia is talking about our freedoms being like a house of cards that needed to be, and that we need to have momentum. And today it could be voting rights, tomorrow it could be reproductive freedom, etc. What we also need to do while we're saying what we're for is we also need to call out and make explicit the problem and how our opponents divide in order to conquer, how they scapegoat, but without ever repeating their exact lie. But we have to expose their strategy. And here is an example of how we did that with another ad we call Superhuman. This is actually mine and Jillian's favorite.
Daddy says that no matter our colors or genders, we all want freedom to live our dreams. But Mommy says that there are bad guys trying to get money and power by telling us who we can be, what we can do, even who we can love, deciding our futures for us. But I'm a superhero. You can be one too if you demand action and vote for freedom to wear a cape or not. I'm gonna keep mine on.
And you can, if you can hear throughout that, we were following our values, villains, victory, vision. You heard that through the voice of the child in that messaging. We have plenty of resources that I'm going to now do a dump of resources in the chat, so you all have them so that you can use in your organizing after this. We use freedom in our education work. This is what we used in Babylon, and we also use across the country for folks to win school board races in the face of these anti-CRT and anti-trans attacks. You'll see here it's about the freedom to learn, leading being the values-led part of that narrative. I dropped the messaging guide as well as open source social media content that can be used in this narrative in any of your campaign efforts. And complementary is our trans youth and freedom to be ourselves messaging guide. And this is a freedom from boxes message where we talk about the freedom to be our kids, to have the freedom to be themselves and pursue their dreams, whether they are Black, white, or brown, native or newcomer, transgender or not. And so this is messaging. I'll drop this in the chat as well, so everyone has. And in our testing, found that this messaging was incredibly helpful for moving voters on trans rights. We put in here on CRT, because we were trying to give ourselves a high bar. That's a very high bar to hit in a poll. And we found that in both of these questions, our messaging was in a contest with people hearing our opposition's message, was able to increase motivation and activation from our base supporters while moving persuadables towards us and where they were on candidates when it came to whether candidates supported, for instance, trans participation in sports and teaching in schools. Quickly, I'm going to go through the rest in a bit of a whirlwind, but another thing I want to leave you with, I know that on Long Island and New York, one of the tip of the spears for opposition is crime attacks and fear mongering on this front. And so this is what it looks like in a freedom frame, in a freedom message. In America, we value our freedoms, freedom to retire in dignity, decide whether and when we grow our families, and know our kids will make it home safe. But Trump Republicans want to take away our freedoms, so they try to scare us by talking about crime while they're out committing them. They support the criminal conspiracy that led to the attack on our country in order to overthrow elections, flip the script on them. Democrats will protect our freedoms to pick our leaders and care for our families with real solutions to make our communities safer for all. I'm going to drop a memo as well that includes resources on confronting different ways of confronting these crime attacks. Feel free to open those on your tabs, but then put them aside. We got a couple more things left. Here is an example of using that approach with an affirmative demand of we know what keeps us safe in an ad that we also ran this midterms.
We know what keeps us safe. It's having communities where people of all races and genders have the fair wages, great schools, and health care we need. But for too long, certain politicians have profited by making us fear each other and blocking common sense measures, from gun safety to police accountability. We know what keeps us safe, and as voters, we'll deliver it.
All right, so the end of this story of the midterms is I want to talk about the wins that are happening now. I talked about Minnesota, and I want to just reflect again what it means through building power on narrative and in organizing together, because they have to be done and jointly together to be successful, what that means. And I know this is not necessarily fully the case in places where we are from and live, but across the country, we saw that Democrats and progressives who won on this have now been able to use that narrative and that messaging that they won the election on to justify pushing boldly and powerfully ahead on our priorities, whether that be in the new trifecta states like Maryland or Minnesota or Michigan, whether that be the big push to make billionaires pay what they owe across states where progressives are now in power, and advancing and protecting our freedoms, as you see in even places like North Carolina. So this is what happens at the end of this story. Unfortunately, in places like New York, we saw too many Democrats instead of pursuing, and too many progressives, in fact, in our own movement spaces, instead of advancing our own terms of the debate, and instead ceded the conversation to Trump Republicans, battled it on their terms, and instead of actually tapping into the desire and energy among voters to protect our freedom to learn, live, and love. So I'm going to drop into the chat another resource, which is understanding the 22 election results that we put out, where we just cite what happened, the story I just told on these midterms. So the last principle here is it's really important to overcome cynicism. That's important for any of us doing this organizing work, especially in the face of all that we're up against. And it's important for our voters and for our audiences, whether we're also just doing campaigning, organizing in or outside of an election. And that's because people have three choices. They can support your opponent, they can support you, or they can stay on the couch. And guess what? The couch has the home field advantage. And we need to overcome cynicism, and we do that by reminding people of past wins and the power of collective action to say, we did, we can, and so we will. And what does that look like in this messaging? That means closing messaging with things like, just as generations of us defeated enslavers, segregationists, and Trump himself, we will defeat Trumpism today and protect our freedoms. And within that, you'll notice that there's speaking from inevitability. Not if, but when. Every time you hear an if, a maybe, no, when we win, when we come together, we will deliver the future that we deserve. And I'm going to close with a final ad that we did in this election that really hits on highlighting these past wins. And this was called Freedom for All.
America was founded on a dream of freedom, one that has yet to come true. It was freedom for some, freedom for the few, until we, the people, rose up and came together. From the Underground Railroad to Standing Rock, from Stonewall to Selma. We've pushed America towards that dream of freedom again and again and again. But there have always been those who use fear and division to cling to power. Now, once again, they are threatening to take away our freedoms, to control our own bodies, to vote and have the will of the people prevail, to love who we love. Progress often seems impossible. The truth is, we decide what's possible. You decide what's possible. We can build a country where all of us are free to thrive, a place where equality, justice, and liberty are real. And someday, when the next generation asks what we did in this moment to protect our freedoms, we'll be able to say everything we could.
And I dropped that ad. You can also see on Twitter and Instagram. All right, I'm wrapping up, folks. Closing, before we go to Q&A, next step that I would love to leave you with and love to see your responses in the chat, so think about it for a minute, is what's one way that you can use this messaging in your campaigning or organizing work? What's one way that you can take what we talked about today and apply it to what all of the incredible work that you're leading right now? Lastly, I'm going to drop a bunch of the links again in the chat. My great hosts here may love or hate me for all these links, but you can also, with your phone right now on the screen, just like, take a picture, and you have this QR code where you can go to our website and get all of our materials because they're all open source and available. And I'm dropping many of these resources again in the chat, but a couple of new ones as well. So you'll see in here, there's a Messaging This Moment guide of just like background on principles of messaging. There's a messaging template you can use to actually copy and paste and restructure your messaging so that you can actually use this ordering and architecture from the race, class, gender narrative to message effectively across issues. There's the Winning with the Race, Class, Narrative memo showing all of the wins from the last 5 years of using race, class, narrative to just, again, help us combat our own cynicism and show what actually is happening and possible. Link to my article that talks about how we can apply this in New York. The link for signing up on our ASO list, We Make the Future, is the implementation hub of the race, class, narrative. You can sign up for trainings with them and their list. And the Research Collaborative, which is the guidance that we provide more electoral guidance in this strain. And the last thing is the latest memo from the Research Collaborative that we made, which is how to message the Manhattan indictment. So you can click on that for some of the latest stuff from us. All right, and just 1 minute over, time for questions. I'd love to have your questions, and drop in the chat again, one next step or one way you're going to apply what we talked about today. All right, Joe or Ting, if you saw any questions already and want to lift them back, bring them forward. Otherwise, I'll go to the stack.
Yeah, go for it. Looks like Sarah is the first in stack.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this. So I'm the indivisible organizer for New York, and one of the narrative things that we're really pushing over the next 2.5 months is leading up to the debt ceiling fight in June. And in New York, we're building the case, we're building the narrative of essentially don't cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And then hearing tonight, you're basically telling us like, don't use the word no, don't use the word not, like somewhere in there. And so we're ideally, I guess the way we've been approaching it is like planting the seed. Like most people don't believe that Democrats are going to cut those beloved programs, but there's already the seeds of doubt that Republicans will, and we want to like water those so that we get people emotional, so that they'll have an action, right, and stuff. And so we're going to be having demonstrations, we're going to be doing town halls, and like letters to the editor is all about like, we don't cut this, because we want to peel off these 6 very vulnerable Republicans, right? So that McCarthy can't pass a harmful bill. Anyway, this is my life. So like, what's a different way of talking about this where, you know, like the end goal, I don't know, like there's so many different goals, like you have to get it press worthy, and then you have to like be able to rally around and agitate people. So I'd love your brilliant brain on this right here, because this is very real life for me.
Sure, Sarah, thank you for all you're doing. It's a tough fight. We've been experimenting and working with folks on this as well as probably some of your indivisible colleagues. So here is something that I would recommend, even using the freedom frame, right? This is about protecting our freedoms, whether across our races, backgrounds, and genders. But MAGA Republicans want to take away our freedom to provide for our families, our freedom to thrive, our freedom to retire with dignity by taking away, you can say in the problem part of the statement, by taking away essential programs like Social Security and Medicare, etc. That is okay to have in your problem statement, but the lead, the top line, the brand of your message, think of it that way, has to be that affirmative aspirational demand that drives the conversation, that brings more folks in to want to take action. And then in some ways, Anat calls it like lower the barriers before you attack, like lower the barriers of your audience, bring them in, and then hit with like, now there's this villain who's going to violate that value that we just talked about a second ago and articulate the problem. So you can talk about like, they want to take away in the line of freedoms, our freedom to thrive, and talk about that in the context of taking away Social Security, sabotaging and taking away our economic well-being being much more personal and about actually our lived experience than this like archaic thing like the debt ceiling, which will motivate nobody. And then come back to, we're coming together and going to demand and put in place leaders who will stand up for our freedoms and ensure we all have a future, or fund our future, where we all can thrive. So there is a way of like using that messaging in the architecture, lead with what you're for and the value, hit them hard, as in contrast with that value on the Social Security, economic sabotage, etc.
But is that like, so I can see all of that like in a letter to the editor, in, you know, motivational piece on why like we want more people to take action, but like when you're trying to like have a headline, right? Or something that goes on a sign, because those pictures are worth 1,000 words. What goes on the sign? What's the headline of the LT, right?
I would say the same thing with the brand. You want the brand to be the thing that's the top headline in the posters, to protect our freedoms and protect our families, protect our futures. Those are things that you want to drive the conversation. For instance, I'll give 2 examples of this. Like in the election we just went through, people could have been the sign could have just been like, they're going to take away abortion rights, they're going to take away X, Y, and Z, a million things. But it's part of our story, but we don't want to lead with the harms and horrors. We want to drive the conversation because we want to not only win and motivate people to take action and drive the media conversation, we want to set the terms of the debate for what comes after. Because what's another problem with negative demands is you maybe, if you win the fight now, you may have set yourself up for tougher terrain afterwards, because people are like, well, we didn't do that thing, but now we're going to do this bad thing. You've never said what you were for, so you don't have then control of what happens afterwards. So would emphasize being like protect, and then the value, the outcome, have that be the top. Have within, that doesn't mean every social media post has to just be the value. Like, of course, things can change across that, but it has to be the top of your narrative and what you're putting out there. So for instance, that's like a protect our freedoms, protect our families day of action, rather than stop them from taking Social Security away day of action. I'll answer some other quick questions here because I know we have a couple minutes left, but thank you, Sarah. Is thoughts on freedom when it comes to housing? Yes, freedom to thrive, freedom to provide for our families, freedom to have a good roof over our heads. You can absolutely render freedom in so many different ways. And the resources that I gave have many ways to do that. And I see Ting already coming at it. Thank you. Let's see.
There was a quick question about slides. Are the slides available?
The slides, everything that I've had in the slides are in the many links that I put together. So everything that I have up is open source and available to you all. So you have that plus this recording. And then I see from Elise, I can see using this to counter Moms for Liberty crap. So yes, freedom to learn, freedom for our kids to learn the truth of our past to make a better future. Boom. We actually tested that, and that was incredibly effective and overcame the opposition attacks trying to use freedom in the for their own means. So absolutely. So that top line, coming back to your question, Sarah, the sign should be like, we're coming together for the freedom to learn. Freedom to learn. Just like if you look at the opposition, their sign, like Moms for Liberty is the top line. That's what's driving their media cycle. Instead, we have to make ours be like, no, we're actually the ones freedom to learn.
And it looks like
right.
Carolyn has their hand up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, and I kind of asked this in the chat, but freedom when it comes to housing, particularly affordable housing, particularly not like construction of new housing. The dominant narrative is like there are all these small mom and pop landlords who would be hurt by regulation, even though it's kind of ridiculous because really they should just be following fair housing laws in the first place. But I guess I'm just wondering if you have thoughts about that. I was looking through your materials just very briefly on the slides, and I didn't really see anything about housing in particular for renters, right? Which is I think most people, because who can afford to buy a house, right?
In brief, just given time, we actually did work about 1.5 years ago on a messaging research project with different housing organizations in the country, and then another organization took up to finalize. So I'd have to find exactly that research, but big takeaways from that was the value of talking about hope. Sorry about that. Someone's calling me for this next thing. The night goes on. Is talking about being whole and being home and the value of family. We also found in this research the value of freedom is very helpful for making this case. So for instance, what that could sound like on the spot, I am not looking at the research in front of me. This could be whether we have lived in this community our whole lives or whether we moved here more recently, whether we are tenants or longtime homeowners, we want the freedom to provide for our families, have a good roof over their heads, and to thrive. But for too long, big developers, wealthy corporations, and corporate landlords have gouged our prices and taken away our freedoms to thrive based on what we look like, where we live, or how much money we have. But just as we came together in our past for civil rights or to win protections in the worst place or to amend our Constitution, we will join together today to ensure that each and every one of us have the freedom to have a good home to live in and to leave those homes and the better life for generations to come. So that's just one way I would render it.
That was inspiring. What about the landlords who think they're not part of the problem because they're not corporate landlords, but they also do shady things, right?
So we could go on a whole conversation on villains here. We always want to create a big us, a small them, especially for our public audiences. Always think about our audiences as the larger public. And we want to create a way where we are polarizing the conversation in the way that we need to for our theory of change and organizing. And so we actually want to make it a situation, in fact, where most people are like, hey, we all should have this freedom. And who is now against freedom? Who wants to be in that camp? You already identified who those villains are. Now you're making it very hard for anyone else to want to be like, hey, I'm also in that villain camp. But you define the villains based on their choices and by their actions. And so that is the setup in the story. There's way more I can go into there about that. But ultimately, you want to do the message that activates people to take action together and that puts it on favorable terms for your organizing and to be able to ultimately build the pressure that you need to move those targets. So much more I'd want to say because it's more on organizing here as well. But unfortunately, I have to jump.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joe and Ting, for having me. Thank you so much, everybody. You have all these resources here. They're open source and available. And on behalf of course, me, but also Jillian, really grateful for all that you do in the place we call home.
Thank you, Anthony. And again, thanks to Jillian and everyone for showing up tonight. And like, this is an important first step. I think together we can build a narrative for Long Island and New York that that will change things for the better. We will have wins. Not if and when, we will have wins when we come together and we do this. So thank you for joining us tonight. And I know I'm going to see some of your faces real soon. So have a great night, everyone. And please join us next week when NYPAN is hosting the documentary, The Big Payback. Link is in the chat, and we will follow up with an email with all the links to all the resources. So again, have a great night, and let's do this.